Section 1 of The Boys and Girls Pliny. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Foon. The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. Introduction. In the little village of Como, in that province of northern Italy called by the Romans Gaul this side the Alps, was born, 23 years after the coming of our Lord, Caius Plinius Secundus, known to us by the shorter name of Pliny. His boyhood was spent in his native province, but we find him in Rome in his 16th year attending the lectures of Apion, the grammarian. Like Herodotus, he became a great traveler for those days, visiting Africa, Egypt, and Greece, and in his 23rd year he served in Germany under Pomponius Secundus, by whom he was greatly beloved, and was soon promoted to the command of a troop of cavalry. He appears to have remained in the army, journeying about extensively in Germany and Gaul, until he was 28 years old, when he returned to Rome and devoted himself to the study of law. But his natural taste for literary work speedily developed itself, and abandoning his forensic pursuits, he set to work upon a life of his friend Pomponius, and an account of the wars in Germany, which filled 20 books when completed, no part of which is now extant. In the reign of Nero, Pliny was appointed procurator, or comptroller of the revenue, in nearer Spain. During his absence upon this mission his brother-in-law, Caius Caecilius, died, leaving one son, a boy 10 years of age, Caius Plinius Caecilius Secundus, afterwards a famous lawyer and the author of the Letters, whom he adopted immediately upon his return from Spain, A.D. 70. To this nephew we are indebted for nearly all we know of Pliny's personal character and mode of life, a very entertaining description of which he gives in a letter to his friend Baebius Macer. It gives me great pleasure to find you such a reader of my uncle's works as to wish to have a complete collection of them, and to ask me for the names of them all. I will act as index then, and you shall know the very order in which they were written, for the studious reader likes to know this. The first work of his was a treatise in 1 volume, on the use of the dart by cavalry. This he wrote when in command of one of the cavalry corps of our allied troops. It is drawn up with great care and ingenuity. Next came The Life of Pomponius Secundus, in 2 volumes. Pomponius had a great affection for him, and my uncle thought he owed this tribute to his memory. The History of the Wars in Germany was in 20 books, in which he gave an account of all the battles we were engaged in against that nation. A dream he had while serving in the army in Germany first suggested the design of this work to him. He imagined that Drusus Nero, who extended his conquests very far into that country, and there lost his life, appeared to him in his sleep, and entreated him to rescue his memory from oblivion. Next comes a work entitled The Student, in 3 parts, which from their length spread into 6 volumes, a work in which is discussed the earliest training and subsequent education of the orator. His Questions of Latin Grammar and Style, in 8 books, was written in the latter part of Nero's reign, when the tyranny of the times made it dangerous to engage in literary pursuits requiring freedom and elevation of tone. He completed the history which Aufidius Bassus left unfinished, and added to it 30 books. And lastly he has left 37 books on Natural History, a work of great compass and learning, and as full of variety as nature herself. You will wonder how a man as busy as he was could find time to compose so many books, and some of them, too, involving such care and labor. But you will be still more surprised when you hear that he pleaded at the bar for some time, that he died in his 56th year, and that the intervening time was employed partly in the execution of the highest official duties, and partly in attendance upon those emperors who honored him with their friendship. But he had a quick apprehension, marvelous power of application, and was of an exceedingly wakeful temperament. He always began to study at midnight at the time of the feast of Vulcan, not for the sake of good luck, but for learning's sake. In winter generally at 1 in the morning, but never later than 2, and often at 12. He was a most ready sleeper, insomuch that he would sometimes, whilst in the midst of his studies, fall off and then wake up again. Before daybreak he used to wait upon Vespasian, who also used his nights for transacting business in, and then proceed to execute the orders he had received. As soon as he returned home, he gave what time was left to study. After a short and light refreshment at noon, agreeably to the good old custom of our ancestors, he would frequently in the summer, if he was disengaged from business, lie down and bask in the sun, during which time some author was read to him, while he took notes and made extracts, for out of every book he read he made extracts. Indeed, it was a maxim of his, that no book was so bad but some good might be got out of it. When this was over, he generally took a cold bath, then some slight refreshment and a little nap. After this, as if it had been a new day, he studied till supper time, when a book was again read to him, from which he would take down running notes. I remember once when his reader had mispronounced a word, one of my uncle's friends at the table made him go back to where the word was and repeat it, upon which my uncle said to his friend, "You understood it, didn't you?" "Yes," said the other. "Why then," said he, "did you make him go over it again? We have lost more than 10 lines by this interruption." Such an economist he was of time. In the summer he used to rise from supper by daylight, and in winter as soon as it was dark, a rule he observed as strictly as if it had been a law of the state. Such was his manner of life amid the bustle and turmoil of the town. But in the country his whole time was devoted to study, except only when in the bath. When I say in the bath, I mean while he was in the water, for all the while he was being rubbed and wiped, he was employed either in hearing some book read to him, or in dictating himself. In going about anywhere, as though he were disengaged from all other business, he applied his mind wholly to that single pursuit. Always by his side was a shorthand writer, with book and tablets, who in the winter wore a particular sort of warm gloves, that the sharpness of the weather might not occasion any interruption to my uncle's studies. And for the same reason, when in Rome, he was always carried in a chair. Footnote: The Romans carried the art of shorthand to its highest perfection, as appears from the following epigram of Martial. Currant verba licet, manus es velocius illis, nondum lingua suum, dextra perigit opus. Swift though the words, the pen still swifter sped, the hand has finished ere the tongue has said. End of footnote. I recollect his once taking me to task for walking. "You need not," he said, "lose these hours." For he looked upon every hour as lost that was not given to study. Through this extraordinary application he found time to compose the several treatises I have mentioned, beside 160 volumes of extracts which he left me in his will, consisting of a kind of commonplace, written on both sides, in a very small hand, which renders the collection doubly voluminous. He used himself to tell us that when he was a comptroller of the revenue in Spain, he could have sold these manuscripts to Largius Licinus for 400,000 sesterces $16,000, and then the collection was not so extensive as now. When you consider the books he has read, and the volumes he has written, are you not inclined to suspect that he never was engaged in public duties, or was ever in the confidence of his prince? On the other hand, when you are told how indefatigable he was in his studies, are you not inclined to wonder that he read and wrote no more than he did? For, on one side, what obstacles would not the business of a court throw in his way? And on the other, what might not such intense application effect? It amuses me when I hear myself called a studious man, who in comparison with him am the merest idler. But why do I mention myself, who am diverted from these pursuits by numberless affairs both public and private? Who among those whose whole lives are devoted to literary pursuits would not blush and feel himself the most confirmed of sluggards by the side of him? I see I have run out my letter farther than I had originally intended, which was only to let you know, as you asked me, what works he had left behind him. But I trust this will be no less acceptable to you than the books themselves, as it may, possibly, not only excite your curiosity to read his works, but also your emulation to copy his example by some attempts of a similar nature. Farewell. In his great work of 37 books upon natural history, the only one which has come down to us, Pliny has compiled a vast encyclopaedia of all human knowledge of his time, comprising more than 20,000 subjects, and necessitating, as he himself states, the perusal of 2,000 volumes, almost all of which have perished. The works of 500 authors, to which he has added countless matters derived from his personal inquiry, experience, and observation. Among his enthusiastic admirers in modern times are the eminent naturalists, Cuvier and Buffon. The former in less extravagant but equally appreciative terms accords to Pliny a high place among the writers of classical antiquity. The work of Pliny, he says, is one of the most precious monuments that have come down to us from ancient times, and affords proof of an astonishing amount of erudition in one who was a warrior and a statesman. To appreciate with justice this vast and celebrated composition, it is necessary to regard it in several points of view, with reference to the plan proposed, the facts stated, and the style employed. The plan proposed by the writer is of immense extent. It is his object to write not simply a natural history in our restricted sense of the term, not an account merely more or less detailed of animals, plants, and minerals, but a work which embraces astronomy, physics, geography, agriculture, commerce, medicine, and the fine arts, and all these in addition to natural history properly so called, while at the same time he continually interweaves with his narrative information upon the arts which bear relation to man considered metaphysically, and the history of nations. So much so, indeed, that in many respects this work was the encyclopaedia of its age. It was impossible in running over, however cursorily, such a prodigious number of subjects, that the writer should not have made us acquainted with a multitude of facts, which, while remarkable in themselves, are the more precious from the circumstance that at the present day he is the only author extant who relates them. It is to be regretted, however, that the manner in which he has collected and grouped this mass of matter has caused it to lose some portion of its value from his mixture of fable with truth. But if Pliny possesses little merit as a critic, it is far otherwise with his talents as a writer, and the immense treasury which he opens to us of Latin terms and forms of expression. These, from the very abundance of the subjects upon which he treats, render his work one of the richest repositories of the Roman language. Wherever he finds it possible to give expression to general ideas or to philosophical views, his language assumes considerable energy and vivacity, and his thoughts present to us a certain novelty and boldness, which tend in a very great degree to relieve the dryness of his enumerations, and, with the majority of his readers, excuse the insufficiency of his scientific indications. He is always noble and serious, full of the love of justice and virtue, detestation of cruelty and baseness, of which he had such frightful instances before his eyes, and contempt for that unbridled luxury which in his time had so deeply corrupted the Roman people. For these great merits Pliny cannot be too highly praised, and despite the faults which we are obliged to admit in him when viewed as a naturalist, we are bound to regard him as one of the most meritorious of the Roman writers, and among those most worthy to be reckoned in the number of the classics who wrote after the reign of Augustus. Among the later honors conferred upon Pliny was one which indirectly cost him his life: his appointment by Vespasian (A.D. 74) as prefect of the Roman fleet on the west coast of Italy. 3 years later, in the great eruption of Mount Vesuvius and the destruction of Herculaneum and Pompeii, he met his romantic end in the execution of his duty, the story of which is again graphically told by the younger Pliny in 2 letters to his friend Tacitus the historian. Your request that I would send you an account of my uncle's death in order to transmit a more exact relation of it to posterity deserves my acknowledgments; for, if this accident shall be celebrated by your pen, the glory of it, I am well assured, will be rendered forever illustrious. And notwithstanding he perished by a misfortune, which, as it involved at the same time a most beautiful country in ruins, and destroyed so many populous cities, seems to promise him an everlasting remembrance notwithstanding he has himself composed many and lasting works. Yet I am persuaded, the mentioning of him in your immortal writings will greatly contribute to render his name immortal. Happy I esteem those to be to whom by provision of the gods has been granted the ability either to do such actions as are worthy of being related, or to relate them in a manner worthy of being read. My uncle was at that time with the fleet under his command at Misenum, in the Bay of Naples. On the 24th of August, about 1 in the afternoon, my mother desired him to observe a cloud which appeared of very unusual size and shape. He had just taken a turn in the sun, and after bathing himself in cold water, and making a light luncheon, had gone back to his books. He immediately arose and went out upon a piece of rising ground, where he could get a better sight of this very uncommon appearance. A cloud was ascending from a mountain, afterwards found to be Vesuvius, the appearance of which I cannot more accurately describe than by likening it to that of a pine tree, for it shot up to a great height in the form of a very tall trunk, spreading itself out at the top into a sort of branch. It appeared sometimes bright and sometimes dark and spotted, according as it was either more or less impregnated with earth and cinders. Footnote: It seems probable that this was the first eruption of Mount Vesuvius, at least of any consequence. Dio, indeed, and other ancient authors speak of it as burning before, but they still describe it as covered with trees and vines, so that the eruptions must have been inconsiderable. End of footnote. This phenomenon seemed to a man of such learning and research as my uncle extraordinary and worth further looking into. He accordingly ordered a light vessel to be got ready, and gave me leave, if I liked, to accompany him. I preferred to go on with my work, and it so happened that he had himself given me something to write out. Just as he was coming out of the house, tablets in hand, he received a note from Rectina, the wife of Bassus, who was in the utmost alarm at the imminent danger which threatened her. As her villa lay at the foot of Mount Vesuvius, there was no way of escape but by sea. She earnestly entreated him therefore to come to her assistance. So he changed his first intention, and what he had begun from a philosophical, he now carried out in a noble and generous spirit. He ordered the galleys to put to sea, and went himself on board with an intention of assisting not only Rectina, but the several other towns which lay thickly strewn along that beautiful coast. Hastening then to the place from which others were fleeing in the utmost terror, he steered his course direct to the point of danger, and with so much calmness and presence of mind as to be able to make and dictate his observations upon all the phenomena of that dreadful scene. He was now so close to the mountain that the cinders, which grew thicker and hotter the nearer he approached, fell into the ships, together with pumice stones, and great black pieces of burning rock. They were in danger of getting aground by the sudden retreat of the sea, as well as from the vast fragments which rolled down from the mountain and obstructed all the shore. Here for a moment he stopped to consider whether or not he should turn back. But when the pilot advised him to do so, he exclaimed, "Fortune favors the brave. Steer to Pomponianus." Pomponianus was at Stabiae, now called Castellamare, separated by a bay, which the sea, after several insensible windings, forms with the shore. He had already sent his baggage on board the ships, for though he was not at that time in actual danger, yet being within sight of it, and extremely near, he determined, if it should in the least increase, to put to sea as soon as the wind, which was blowing dead inshore, should go down. It was favorable, however, for carrying my uncle to Pomponianus, whom he found in the greatest consternation. He embraced him tenderly, encouraging and urging him to keep his spirits, and the more effectually to soothe his fears by seeming unconcerned himself, ordered a bath to be got ready, bathed and sat down to supper with great cheerfulness, or at least, what is just as heroic, with every appearance of it. Meanwhile, broad flames shone out in several places from Mount Vesuvius, which the darkness of the night contributed to render still brighter and clearer. My uncle, to soothe the apprehensions of his friend, assured him that it was only the burning of the villages, which the country people had abandoned to the flames. After this he retired to rest, and was so little disquieted as to fall into a sound sleep; for his breathing, which, on account of his corpulence, was rather heavy and sonorous, was heard by attendants outside. The court which led to his apartment was now almost filled with stones and ashes, and if he had continued there any longer it would have been impossible for him to have made his way out. So he was awakened, and getting up, went to Pomponianus and the rest of his company, who were feeling too anxious to think of sleep. They consulted together whether it would be most prudent to trust to the houses, which now rocked from side to side with frequent and violent concussions as though shaken from their very foundations, or fly to the open fields, where the calcined stones and cinders, though light, fell in such large showers as to threaten destruction. In this choice of dangers they resolved for the fields. But I must say that while the rest of the company were hurried into this resolution by their fears, my uncle embraced it upon cool and deliberate consideration. They tied pillows upon their heads with napkins, and went out, and this was their whole defense against the storm of stones that fell round them. It was now day everywhere else, but there a deeper darkness prevailed than in the thickest night, alleviated, however, in some degree by torches and other lights of various kind. They thought proper to go farther down upon the shore to see if they might safely put out to sea, but found the waves still running extremely high and boisterous. There my uncle, laying himself down upon a sailcloth which was spread for him, called twice for some cold water, which he drank, when immediately the flames, preceded by a strong whiff of sulphur, dispersed the rest of the party and obliged him to rise. He raised himself up with the assistance of two of his servants, and instantly fell down dead. suffocated, as I conjecture, by the noxious vapor, having always had a weak throat, which was often inflamed. As soon as it was light again, which was not till the 3rd day after this melancholy accident, his body was found untouched and without any marks of violence upon it, in the dress in which he fell, and looking more like a man asleep than dead. During all this time, my mother and I were at Misenum. After my uncle had left us, I spent the time in my studies until it was the hour for my bath, after which I went to supper, and then fell into a short and uneasy sleep. A trembling of the earth had been noticed for many days before, which did not alarm us much, as this is quite an ordinary occurrence in Campania. But it was so particularly violent that night that it not only shook but actually overturned, as it would seem, everything about us. My mother rushed into my chamber, where she found me rising in order to awaken her. We sat down in the open court of the house, which occupied a small space between the buildings and the sea. As I was at that time but 18 years of age, I know not whether I should call my behavior, in this dangerous juncture, courage or folly. But I took up Livy, and amused myself turning over that author, and even making extracts from him, as if I had been perfectly at my leisure. Just then a friend of my uncle's, who had lately come to him from Spain, joined us, and observing me sitting by my mother with a book in my hand, reproved her for her calmness, and me at the same time for my careless security. Nevertheless, I went on with my author. Though it was now morning, the light was still exceedingly faint and doubtful. The buildings all around us tottered, and though we stood upon open ground, yet as the place was narrow and confined, it was not possible to remain without imminent danger. We therefore resolved to quit the town. A panic-stricken crowd followed us, and as to a mind distracted with terror, every suggestion seems more prudent than its own, pressed on us in dense array to drive us forward as we came out. When at a convenient distance from the house, we stopped in the midst of a most dangerous and dreadful scene. The chariots, which we had ordered to be drawn out, were so agitated backwards and forwards, though upon the most level ground, that we could not keep them steady, even by supporting them with large stones. The sea seemed to roll back upon itself, and to be driven from its banks by the convulsive motion of the earth. It is certain at least that the shore was considerably enlarged, and several sea animals were left upon it. On the other side, a dreadful black cloud, broken with rapid zigzag flashes, revealed behind it variously shaped masses of flame. These last were like sheet lightning, but much larger. Upon this, our Spanish friend, whom I mentioned above, addressing himself to my mother with great energy and urgency, said, "If your brother be safe, he certainly wishes you may be so too, and if he has perished, it was his desire, no doubt, that you might both survive him. So why do you delay your escape a moment?" "We could never think of our own safety," said she, "while we are uncertain of his." Upon this our friend left us, and withdrew from the danger with the utmost precipitation. Soon afterwards the cloud began to descend and cover the sea. It had already surrounded and concealed the island of Capri and the promontory of Misenum. My mother now besought, urged, even commanded me to make my escape at any rate, which, as I was young, I might easily do. As for herself, she said, her age and corpulency rendered all attempts of that sort impossible. As for herself, she said, her age and corpulency rendered all attempts of that sort impossible. However, she would willingly meet death if she could have the satisfaction of seeing that she was not the occasion of mine. But I absolutely refused to leave her, and taking her by the hand, compelled her to go with me. She complied with great reluctance, and not without many reproaches to herself for retarding my flight. The ashes now began to fall upon us, though in no great quantity. I looked back. A dense, dark mist seemed to be following us, spreading itself over the country like a cloud. "Let us turn out of the high road," I said, "while we can still see, for fear that, should we fall in the road, we should be pressed to death in the dark by the crowds that are following us." We had scarcely sat down when night came upon us, not such as we have when the sky is cloudy, or when there is no moon, but that of a room when it is shut up and all the lights put out. You might hear the shrieks of women, the screams of children, and the shouts of men, some calling for their children, others for their parents, others for their husbands, and seeking to recognize each other by the voices that replied. One lamenting his own fate, another that of his family, some wishing to die from the very fear of dying, some lifting their hands to the gods, but the greater part convinced that there were now no gods at all, and that the final, endless night of which we have heard had come upon the world. Footnote: The Stoic and Epicurean philosophers held that the world would eventually be destroyed by fire, and all things would fall into original chaos, not excepting even the national gods themselves from the destruction of this general conflagration. End of footnote. Some augmented the real terrors by others imaginary or willfully invented. I remember some who declared that one part of Misenum had fallen, and that another was on fire. It was false, but they found people to believe them. It now grew rather lighter, which we imagined to be not the forerunner of an approaching burst of flames, as in truth it was, but the return of day. However, the fire fell at a distance from us. Then we were immersed again in thick darkness, and a heavy shower of ashes rained upon us, which we were obliged every now and then to stand up to shake off, otherwise we should have been crushed and buried in the heap. I might boast that during all this scene of horror, not a sigh or expression of fear escaped me, for my support was grounded in that miserable, though mighty consolation, that all mankind were involved in the same calamity, and that I was perishing with the world itself. At last this dreadful darkness was dissipated by degrees, like a cloud or smoke. The real day returned, and even the sun shone out, though with a lurid light, as when an eclipse is coming on. Every object that presented itself to our eyes, now extremely weakened, seemed changed, being covered deep with ashes as with snow. We returned to Misenum, where we refreshed ourselves as well as we could, and passed an anxious night between hope and fear, though with a much larger share of the latter, for the earthquake still continued, and many frenzied persons ran up and down heightening their own and their friends' calamities by terrible predictions. However, my mother and I, notwithstanding the danger we had passed, and that which still threatened us, had no thoughts of leaving the place, till we could receive some news of my uncle. And now, please read this narrative without any view of inserting it in your history, of which it is not in the least worthy. Indeed, you must lay it to your own request if my account does not appear worth even the trouble of a letter. Farewell. In the preparation of the most interesting parts of Pliny's natural history for younger readers, I have had constant recourse for footnotes to the annotations of those devoted students of Pliny, Cuvier, Bostock, and Agesson, whose work can rarely be improved upon. The literal rendering of the original Latin text has been closely followed, and in all instances where the author's statements have proved in the light of modern science to be erroneous, unless evidently preposterous, attention has been called to the fact. With this volume, I reluctantly bring to completion the brief series of classical authors best adapted for the reading of boys and girls, in the preparation of which the greater part of my leisure hours during the past 3 years has been occupied. Plutarch, Herodotus, Pliny, a trio of illustrious names. Of how many can it be truly said, as of them, the world is wiser and better for their living? New York City, July 1st, 1885. End of section 1. Recording by phone. Section 2 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 1. Dedication. Caius Plinius Secundus to his friend Titus Vespasian. This treatise on natural history, a novel work in Roman literature, which I have just completed, I have taken the liberty to dedicate to you, most gracious Emperor, an appellation peculiarly suitable to you, while on account of his age, that of great is more appropriate to your father. For thou still ne'er wouldst quite despise the trifles that I write. If I may be allowed to shelter myself under the example of Catullus, my fellow countryman. For he, as you know, when his napkins had been changed, (Footnote: The allusion, otherwise obscure, is to the fact that some friends of Catullus had filched a set of table napkins, which had been given to him by Verenius and Fabius, and substituted others in their place. End of footnote.) Expressed himself a little harshly, from his anxiety to show his friendship for his dear little Veranius and Fabius. At the same time, this importunity of mine may effect, what you complained of my not having done in another too forward epistle of mine. It will put upon record, and let all the world know, with what kindness you exercise the imperial dignity. You have had the honor of a triumph, and of the censorship, have been 6 times consul, and have shared in the tribunate. And what is still more honorable, whilst you have held them in conjunction with your father, you have presided over the equestrian order, and been the prefect of the praetorians. All this you have done for the service of the republic, and at the same time have regarded me as a fellow soldier and a messmate. Nor has the extent of your prosperity produced any change in you, except that it has given you the power of doing good to the utmost of your wishes. And whilst all these circumstances increase the veneration which other persons feel for you, with respect to myself, they have made me so bold as to wish to become more familiar. You must, therefore, blame yourself for any fault of this kind that I may commit. But although I have laid aside my blushes, I have not gained my object, for you still awe me, and keep me at a distance, by the majesty of your understanding. In no one does the force of eloquence and of tribunician oratory blaze out more powerfully. With that glowing language you thunder forth the praises of your father. How dearly you love your brother! How admirable is your talent for poetry! What a fertility of genius you possess, so as to enable you to imitate your brother! But who is there that is bold enough to form an estimate on these points, if he is to be judged by you, and more especially, if you are challenged to do so? For the case of those who merely publish their works is very different from that of those who expressly dedicate them to you. In the former case I might say, Emperor, why do you read these things? They are written only for the common people, for farmers or mechanics, or for those who have nothing else to do. Why do you trouble yourself with them? Indeed, when I undertook this work, I did not expect that you would sit in judgment upon me. I considered your situation much too elevated for you to descend to such an office. Besides, we possess the right of openly rejecting the opinion of men of learning. Marcus Tullius Cicero himself, whose genius is beyond all competition, uses this privilege, and, remarkable as it may appear, employs an advocate in his own defense. I do not write for very learned people. I do not wish my works to be read by Manius Persius, but by Junius Congus. And if Lucilius, who first introduced the satirical style, applied such a remark to himself, and if Cicero thought proper to borrow it, and that more especially in his treatise De Republica, how much reason have I to do so, who have such a judge to defend myself against? And by this dedication I have deprived myself of the benefit of challenge, for it is a very different thing whether a person has a judge given him by lot, or whether he voluntarily selects one, and we always make more preparation for an invited guest than for one that comes in unexpectedly. I am well aware that, placed as you are in the highest station, and gifted with the most splendid eloquence and the most accomplished mind, even those who come to pay their respects to you do it with a kind of veneration. On this account I ought to be careful that what is dedicated to you should be worthy of you. But the country people, and indeed some whole nations, offer milk to the gods, and those who cannot procure frankincense substitute in its place salted cakes; for the gods are not dissatisfied when they are worshipped by every one to the best of his ability. But my temerity will appear the greater by the consideration that these volumes, which I dedicate to you, are of such inferior importance. For they do not admit of the display of genius, nor indeed is mine one of the highest order. They admit of no excursions, nor orations, nor discussions, nor of any wonderful adventures to tickle the fancy of the reader. The nature of things, and life as it actually exists, are described in them, and often the lowest department of it; so that in very many cases I am obliged to use rude and foreign, or even barbarous terms, and these often require to be introduced by a kind of preface. And besides this, my road is not a beaten track, nor one which the mind is much disposed to travel over. There is no one among us who has ever attempted it, nor is there any one individual among the Greeks who has treated of all the topics. Most of us seek for nothing but amusement in our studies, while others are fond of subjects that are of excessive subtlety, and completely involved in obscurity. My object is to treat of all those things which the Greeks include in the encyclopaedia, which, however, are either not generally known or are rendered dubious from our ingenious conceits. And there are other matters which many writers have given so much in detail that we quite loathe them. It is, indeed, no easy task to give novelty to what is old, and authority to what is new; brightness to what is become tarnished, and light to what is obscure; to render what is slightly acceptable, and what is doubtful, worthy of our confidence; to give to all a natural manner, and to each its peculiar nature. It is sufficiently honorable and glorious to have been willing even to make the attempt, although it should prove unsuccessful. I have included in 36 books 20,000 topics, all worthy of attention, gained by the careful perusal of 100 select authors, and of about 2,000 volumes, of which a few only are in the hands of the studious, on account of the obscurity of the subjects. To these I have made considerable additions of things, which were either not known to my predecessors, or which have been lately discovered. Nor can I doubt but that there still remain many things which I have omitted; for I am a mere mortal, and one that has many occupations. I have, therefore, been obliged to compose this work at interrupted intervals, by night as well as by day, so that you will find that I have not been idle even during this period. The day I devote to you, exactly portioning out my sleep to the necessity of my health, and contenting myself with this reward, that while we are musing on these subjects, as Varro says, we are adding to the length of our lives, for life properly consists in being awake. I consider it to be courteous, and to indicate an ingenious modesty, to acknowledge the sources whence we have derived assistance, and not to act as most of those have done whom I have examined. For I must inform you, that in comparing various authors with each other, I have discovered that some of the latest and most dignified writers have transcribed, word for word, from former works, without making any acknowledgment, not avowedly rivaling them, in the manner of Virgil, or with the candor of Cicero, who in his treatise De Republica professes to coincide in opinion with Plato, and in his essay on consolation for his daughter, says that he follows Crantor, and in his offices, Panaetius, volumes which, as you well know, ought not merely to be always in our hands, but to be learned by heart. For it is surely the mark of a perverted mind and a bad disposition to prefer being caught in a theft to returning what we have borrowed, especially when we have acquired capital by usurious interest. The Greeks were wonderfully happy in their titles. One work they called Kyrion, which means that it was as sweet as a honeycomb; another Kyra Amalthea, or Cornucopia, so that you might expect to get even a draught of pigeon's milk from it. Then they have their flowers, their muses, magazines, manuals, gardens, pictures, and sketches, all of them titles for which a man might be tempted even to forfeit his bail. But when you enter upon the works, O ye gods and goddesses, how full of emptiness! Our duller countrymen have merely their antiquities, or their examples, or their arts. I think one of the most humorous of them has his Nocturnal Studies. Varro, indeed, is not much behind him when he calls one of his satires a trick and a half, and another turning the tables. Sesculysses and Flextabula, literally Ulysses and a half, and bent table. Diodorus was the first among the Greeks who laid aside this trifling manner and named his history the library. Apion, the grammarian, he whom Tiberius Caesar called the trumpeter of the world, but would rather seem to be the bell of the town crier, supposed that every one to whom he inscribed any work would thence acquire immortality. I do not regret not having given my work a more fanciful title. That I may not, however, appear to inveigh so completely against the Greeks, I should wish to be considered under the same point of view with those inventors of the arts of painting and sculpture, of whom you will find an account in these volumes, whose works, although they are so perfect that we are never satisfied with admiring them, are inscribed with a temporary title, such as Apelles or Polycletus was doing this, implying that the work was only commenced and still imperfect, and that the artist might benefit by the criticisms that were made on it and alter any part that required it, if he had not been prevented by death. It is also a great mark of their modesty that they inscribed their works as if they were the last which they had executed, and as still in hand at the time of their death. I think there are but 3 works of art which are inscribed positively with the words, "Such a one executed this." Of these I shall give an account in the proper place. In these cases it appears that the artist felt the most perfect satisfaction with his work, and certainly these pieces have excited the envy of every one. I freely admit that much may be added to my works, not only to this, but to all which I have published. By this admission I hope to escape from the carping critics, and I have the more reason to say this, because I hear that there are certain Stoics and Logicians, and also Epicureans (from the grammarians I expected as much), who are virulent against the little work I published on grammar, Footnote: Pliny the Younger, in one of his letters, 3.5, where he enumerates all his uncle's publications, informs us that he wrote a piece of criticism in 8 books concerning ambiguity of expression. Melmoth's Pliny, 136. End of footnote. But I well know that even a woman once wrote against Theophrastus, a man so eminent for his eloquence that he obtained from it his name, which signifies the divine speaker. Footnote: His real name was Tertimus, but in consequence of the beauty of his style, he acquired the appellation by which he is generally known from the words Theophrasi. Cicero refers to him in Brutus, 121, Orator 17, and on other various occasions. End of footnote. Because the public good requires that you should be spared as much as possible from all trouble, I have subjoined to this epistle the contents of each of the following books, and have used my best endeavors to prevent your being obliged to read them all through. And this, which was done for your benefit, will also serve the same purpose for others, so that any one may search for what he wishes, and may know where to find it. This has been already done among us by Valerius Soranus, in his work which he entitled On Mysteries. The first book is the preface of the work dedicated to Titus Vespasian Caesar. The second is on the world, the elements, and the heavenly bodies. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth books are on geography, in which is contained an account of the situation of the different countries, the inhabitants, the seas, towns, harbors, mountains, rivers, and dimensions, and the various tribes, some of which still exist, while others have disappeared. The seventh is on man, and the inventions of man. The eighth on the various kinds of land animals. The ninth on aquatic animals. The 10th on the various kinds of birds. The 11th on insects. The 12th on odoriferous plants. The 13th on exotic trees. The 14th on vines. The 15th on fruit trees. The 16th on forest trees. The 17th on plants raised in nurseries or gardens. The 18th on the nature of fruits and the cerealia, and the pursuits of the husbandman. The 19th on flax, broom, footnote, spartum. This plant was used to make bands for the vines and cables for ships. End of footnote. And gardening. The 20th on the cultivated plants that are proper for food and for medicine. The 21st on flowers and plants that are used for making garlands. The 22nd on garlands and medicines made from plants. The 23rd on medicines made from wine and from cultivated trees. The 24th on medicines made from forest trees. The 25th on medicines made from wild plants. The 26th on new diseases and medicines made, for certain diseases, from plants. The 27th on some other plants and medicines. The 28th on medicines procured from man and from large animals. The 29th on medical authors, and on medicines from other animals. The 30th on magic, and medicines for certain parts of the body. The 31st on medicines from aquatic animals. The 32nd on the other properties of aquatic animals. The 33rd on gold and silver. The 34th on copper and lead, and the workers of copper. The 35th on painting, colors, and painters. The 36th on marbles and stones. The 37th on gems. End of section 2. Recording by phone. Section 3 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Foon. Book 2. An Account of the World and the Elements. Chapter 1. The Character and Form of the World. The world, and whatever that be which we otherwise call the heavens, by the vault of which all things are enclosed, we must conceive to be a deity, to be eternal, without bounds, neither created nor subject at any time to destruction. Footnote. The term mundus is used by Pliny sometimes to mean the earth and its immediate appendages, the visible solar system, and at other times the universe, while in some instances it is used in a rather vague manner without any distinct reference to either one or other of the above designations. I have usually translated it by the term world, as approaching nearest to the sense of the original. End of footnote. To inquire what is beyond it is no concern of man, nor can the human mind form any conjecture respecting it. It is sacred, eternal, and without bounds, all in all, indeed including everything in itself, finite, yet like what is infinite, the most certain of all things, yet like what is uncertain, externally and internally embracing all things in itself. It is the work of nature, and itself constitutes nature. To go out of this world and to search for what is beyond it would be madness, perfect madness, as if one who is ignorant of his own dimensions could ascertain the measure of anything else, or as if the human mind could see what the world itself cannot contain. That the universe has the form of a perfect globe, we learn from the name which has been uniformly given to it, as well as from numerous natural arguments. For not only does a figure of this kind return everywhere into itself, and sustain itself, also including itself, requiring no adjustments, not sensible of either end or beginning in any of its parts, and is best fitted for that motion, with which, as will appear hereafter, it is continually turning round, but still more, because we perceive it, by the evidence of the sight, to be in every part convex and central, which could not be the case were it of any other figure. Footnote. The astronomy of our author is derived mainly from Aristotle. End of footnote. The rising and the setting of the sun clearly prove that this globe is carried round in the space of 24 hours, in an eternal and never-ceasing circuit, and with incredible swiftness. I am not able to say whether the sound caused by the whirling about of so great a mass be excessive, and therefore far beyond what our ears can perceive, nor indeed whether the resounding of so many stars, all carried along at the same time and revolving in their orbits, may not produce a kind of delightful harmony of incredible sweetness. Footnote. This theory of the music of the spheres was maintained by Pythagoras, but was derided by Aristotle. End of footnote. To us, who are in the interior, the world appears to glide silently along, both by day and by night. Various circumstances in nature prove to us that there are impressed on the heavens innumerable figures of animals and of all kinds of objects, and that its surface is not perfectly polished like the eggs of birds, as some celebrated authors assert. This is evident to the eye, for in one part we have the figure of a wain, in others of a bear, of a bull, and of a letter. Footnote. The letter delta in the constellation of the triangle, but except in this one case, the constellations have no visible resemblance to the objects of which they bear the name. End of footnote. While in the middle of them, over our heads, there is a white circle. With respect to the name, I am influenced by the unanimous opinions of all nations, For what the Greeks, from its being ornamented, have termed kosmos, we, from its perfect and complete elegance, have termed mundus. The name caelum, no doubt, refers to its being engraved, as it were, with the stars, as Varro suggests. In confirmation of this idea, we may adduce the zodiac, in which are 12 figures of animals. Through them it is that the sun has continued his course for so many ages. I do not find that anyone has doubted that there are 4 elements. The highest of these is supposed to be fire, and hence proceed the eyes of so many glittering stars. The next is that spirit, which both the Greeks and ourselves call by the same name, air. It is by the force of this vital principle, pervading all things and mingling with all, that the earth, together with the 4th element, water, is balanced in the middle of space. These are mutually bound together, each remaining in its appropriate place by the never-ceasing revolution of the world. Between this body and the heavens there are suspended, in this aerial spirit, 7 stars, separated by determinate spaces, which, on account of their motion, we call planets or wandering bodies, although in reality none are less so. The sun is carried along in the midst of these, a body of great size and power, the ruler, not only of the seasons and of the different climates, but also of the stars themselves and of the heavens. When we consider his operations, we must regard him as the life, or rather the mind of the universe, the chief regulator and the god of nature. He also lends his light to the other stars. He is most illustrious and excellent, beholding all things and hearing all things, qualities which are ascribed to him exclusively by the prince of poets, Homer. Footnote: Iliad 3, 277, and Odyssey 12, 323. End of footnote. End of section 3. Recording by phone. Section 4 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 2 of God. I consider it, therefore, an indication of human weakness to inquire into the figure and form of God. For whatever God be, if there be any God distinct from the world, and wherever he exists, he is all sense, all sight, all hearing, all life, all mind, and all within himself. To believe that there are a number of gods derived from the virtues and vices of man, as chastity, concord, understanding, hope, honor, clemency, and fidelity, or according to the opinion of Democritus, that there are only 2, punishment and reward, indicates still greater folly. Human nature, weak and frail as it is, mindful of its own infirmity, has made these divisions, so that every one might have recourse to that which he supposed himself to stand more particularly in need of. Hence we find different names employed by different nations. The inferior deities are arranged in classes, and diseases and plagues are deified, in consequence of our anxious wish to propitiate them. It was from this cause that a temple was dedicated to Fever, at the public expense, on the Palatine Hill, and that an altar was erected to Good Fortune on the Esquiline. Hence we may understand how it comes to pass that there is a greater population of the celestials than of human beings, since each individual makes a separate god for himself, adopting his own Juno and his own genius. To suppose that some gods should be old and always gray-headed, and others young and like children, some of a dark complexion, winged, lame, produced from eggs, living and dying on alternate days, is puerile and foolish enough. But it is the height of impudence to imagine that they have contests and quarrels, and that there are gods of theft and of various crimes. To assist man is to be a god. This is the path to eternal glory. This is the path which the Roman nobles formerly pursued, and this is the path which is now pursued by the greatest ruler of our age, Vespasian Augustus, he who has come to the relief of an exhausted empire, as well as by his sons. The ancient mode of remunerating those who deserved it was to regard them as gods. For the names of all the gods, as well as of the stars that I have mentioned above, have been derived from their services to mankind. And with respect to Jupiter and Mercury, and the rest of the celestial nomenclature, who does not admit that they have reference to certain natural phenomena? But it is ridiculous to suppose that the great head of all things, whatever it be, pays any regard to human affairs. Can we believe, or rather can there be any doubt, that it is not polluted by such a disagreeable and complicated office? It is not easy to determine which opinion would be most for the advantage of mankind, since we observe some who have no respect for the gods, and others who carry it to a scandalous excess. They are slaves to foreign ceremonies. They carry on their fingers the gods and the monsters whom they worship. Footnote: the author here alludes to the figures of the Egyptian deities that were engraved on rings. End of footnote. They condemn and they lay great stress on certain kinds of food. They impose on themselves dreadful ordinances, not even sleeping quietly. They do not marry or adopt children, or indeed do anything else, without the sanction of their sacred rites. There are others, on the contrary, who will cheat in the very capital, and will forswear themselves even by Jupiter Tonans. Footnote: his specific office was to execute vengeance on the impious. End of footnote. And while these thrive in their crimes, the others torment themselves with their superstitions to no purpose. Among these discordant opinions, mankind have discovered for themselves a kind of intermediate deity, by which our skepticism concerning God is still increased. For all over the world, in all places, and at all times, Fortune is the only god whom everyone invokes. She alone is spoken of. She alone is accused and is supposed to be guilty. She alone is in our thoughts, is praised and blamed, and is loaded with reproaches. Wavering as she is, conceived by the generality of mankind to be blind, wandering, inconstant, uncertain, variable, and often favoring the unworthy. To her are referred all our losses and all our gains, and in casting up the accounts of mortals, she alone balances the 2 pages of our sheet. We are so much in the power of chance, that change itself is considered as a god, and the existence of God becomes doubtful. But there are others who reject this principle and assign events to the influence of the stars, and to the laws of our nativity. They suppose that God, once for all, issues his decrees and never afterwards interferes. This opinion begins to gain ground, and both the learned and the unlearned vulgar are falling into it. Hence we have the admonitions of thunder, the warnings of oracles, the predictions of soothsayers, and things too trifling to be mentioned, as sneezing and stumbling with the feet reckoned among omens. The late Emperor Augustus relates that he put the left shoe on the wrong foot the day when he was near being assaulted by his soldiers. And such things as these so embarrass improvident mortals, that among all of them this alone is certain, that there is nothing certain, and that there is nothing more proud or more wretched than man. For other animals have no care but to provide for their subsistence, for which the spontaneous kindness of nature is all sufficient; and this one circumstance renders their lot more especially preferable, that they never think about glory or money or ambition, and above all, that they never reflect on death. The belief, however, that on these points the gods superintend human affairs is useful to us, as well as that the punishment of crimes, although sometimes tardy, from the deity being occupied with such a mass of business, is never entirely remitted. And indeed, this constitutes the great comfort in this imperfect state of man, that even the deity cannot do everything. For he cannot procure death for himself, even if he wished it, which, so numerous are the evils of life, has been granted to man as our chief good. Nor can he make mortals immortal, or recall to life those who are dead; nor can he effect that he who has once lived shall not have lived, or that he who has enjoyed honors shall not have enjoyed them; nor has he any influence over past events but to cause them to be forgotten. And if we illustrate the nature of our connection with God by a less serious argument, he cannot make twice 10 not to be 20, and many other things of this kind. End of section 4. Recording by phone. Section 5 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 3. The Dimensions of the World. The stadium is equal to 125 of our Roman paces, or 625 feet. Posidonius supposes that there is a space of not less than 40 stadia around the earth, whence mists, winds, and clouds proceed. Beyond this, he supposes that the air is pure and liquid, consisting of uninterrupted light. From the clouded region to the moon there is a space of 2 million of stadia, and thence to the sun of 500 million. It is in consequence of this space that the sun, notwithstanding his immense magnitude, does not burn the earth. Many persons have imagined that the clouds rise to the height of 900 stadia. These points are not completely made out, and are difficult to explain, but we have given the best account of them that has been published. End of section 5. Recording by phone. Section 6 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 4. Of the Stars which appear suddenly, or of comets. A few things still remain to be said concerning the world, for stars are suddenly formed in the heavens themselves. Of these there are various kinds. The Greeks name these stars comets; we name them crinichiae, as if shaggy with bloody locks, and surrounded with bristles like hair. Some of them have a mane hanging down from their lower part, like a long beard; some vibrate like a dart with a very quick motion. It was one of this kind which the Emperor Titus described in his very excellent poem as having been seen in his 5th consulship; and this was the last of these bodies which has been observed. Some are short and pointed, of a pale color, and shine like a sword without any rays. Others of an amber color emit a few rays from their margin only. One kind exhibits the figure of a cask, appearing convex and emitting a smoky light. Another has the appearance of a horn; it is like the one which was visible when the Greeks fought at Salamis. Occasionally you see one like a burning torch, and again one like a horse's mane. The latter often has a very rapid motion, like a circle revolving on itself. There is also a white comet with silver hair, so brilliant that it can scarcely be looked at, exhibiting, as it were, the aspect of a deity in a human form. There are some also that are shaggy, having the appearance of a fleece, surrounded by a kind of crown. There was one where the appearance of a mane was changed into that of a spear. It happened in the 109th Olympiad, in the 398th year of the city. Footnote. According to the most approved modern chronology, the middle of the 109th Olympiad corresponds to the 211th year of the city, or 542 BC. End of footnote. The shortest time during which any of them has been observed to be visible is 7 days, the longest one 180 days. Rome is the only place in the whole world where there is a temple dedicated to a comet, the one which was thought by the late Emperor Augustus to be auspicious to him, from its appearing during the games which he was celebrating in honor of Venus, not long after the death of his father Caesar. He expressed his joy in these terms: "During the very time of these games of mine, a hairy star was seen during 7 days, in the part of the heavens which is under the Great Bear. It rose about the 11th hour of the day, was very bright, and was conspicuous in all parts of the earth. The common people supposed the star to indicate that the soul of Caesar was admitted among the immortal gods." This is what he proclaimed in public, but in secret he rejoiced at this auspicious omen, interpreting it as produced for himself, and to confess the truth, it really proved a salutary omen for the world at large. Some persons suppose that these stars are permanent and that they move through their proper orbits, but that they are only visible when they recede from the sun. Others suppose that they are produced by an accidental vapor together with the force of fire, and that from this circumstance they are liable to be dissipated. End of section 6. Recording by phone. Section 7 of the Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 5. The Doctrine of Hipparchus about the Stars. Hipparchus, who can never be sufficiently commended, as one who more especially proved the relation of the stars to man, and that our souls are a portion of heaven, discovered a new star that was produced in his own age, and by observing its motions on the day in which it shone, it was led to doubt whether this does not often happen, that those stars have motion which we suppose to be fixed. And the same individual attempted, what might have seemed presumptuous even in a deity, to number the stars for posterity, and to express their relations by appropriate names, having previously devised instruments by which he might mark the place and the magnitude of each individual star. Footnote. Nothing is known respecting the nature of these instruments. End of footnote. In this way it might be easily discovered, not only whether they were destroyed or produced, but whether they changed their relative positions, and likewise whether they were increased or diminished, the heavens being thus left as an inheritance to anyone who might be found competent to complete his plan. End of section 7. Recording by phone. Section 8 of the Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 6 of the Stars which are named Castor and Pollux. I have seen, during the night watches of the soldiers, a luminous appearance, like a star, attached to the javelins on the ramparts. They also settle on the yardarms and other parts of ships while sailing, producing a kind of vocal sound, like that of birds flitting about. When they occur singly, they are mischievous, so as even to sink the vessels, and if they strike on the lower part of the keel, setting them on fire. When there are two of them, they are considered auspicious, and are thought to predict a prosperous voyage, as it is said that they drive away that dreadful and terrific meteor named Helena. On this account their efficacy is ascribed to Castor and Pollux, and they are invoked as gods. They also occasionally shine round the heads of men in the evening, which is considered as predicting something very important. Footnote: This is said by Livy to have occurred to Servius Tullius while he was a child, Lib. 1, cap. 39, and by Virgil to Ascanius, Aenet 2, 632-5. End of footnote. But there is great uncertainty respecting the cause of all these things, and they are concealed in the majesty of nature. End of section 8. Recording by phone. Section 9 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 7, of Thunder and Lightning. It cannot be denied that fire proceeding from the stars which are above the clouds may fall on them, as we frequently observe on serene evenings, and that the air is agitated by the impulse, as darts when they are hurled whiz through the air. And when it arrives at the cloud, a discordant kind of vapor is produced, as when hot iron is plunged into water, and a wreath of smoke is evolved. Hence arise squalls. And if wind or vapor be struggling in the cloud, thunder is discharged. If it bursts out with a flame, there is a thunderbolt. If it be long in forcing out its way, it is simply a flash of lightning. By the latter, the cloud is simply rent, by the former it is shattered. Thunder is produced by the stroke given to the condensed air, and hence it is that the fire darts from the chinks of the clouds. It is possible, also, that the vapor, which has risen from the earth, being repelled by the stars, may produce thunder, when it is pent up in a cloud. Nature restraining the sound whilst the vapor is struggling to escape, but when it does escape, the sound bursting forth, as is the case with bladders that are distended with air. It is possible also that the spirit, whatever it be, may be kindled by friction, when it is so violently projected. It is possible that, by the dashing of the two clouds, the lightning may flash out, as is the case when two stones are struck against each other. We have accounts of many different kinds of thunderbolts. Those which are dry do not burn objects, but dissipate them, while those which are moist do not burn, but blacken them. There is a third kind, which is called bright lightning, of a very wonderful nature, by which casks are emptied, without the vessels themselves being injured, or there being any other trace left of their operation. Gold, copper, and silver are melted, while the bags which contain them are not in the least burned, nor even the wax seal much defaced. Among the prognostics which took place at the time of Catiline's conspiracy, Marcus Herennius, a magistrate of the borough of Pompeii, was struck by lightning when the sky was without clouds. End of section 9. Recording by phone. Section 10 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 8. Nature of the Earth. Next comes the earth, on which alone of all parts of nature we have bestowed the names that implies maternal veneration. It is appropriated to man as the heavens are to God. She receives us at our birth, nourishes us when born, and ever afterwards supports us. Lastly, embracing us in her bosom when we are rejected by the rest of nature, she then covers us with especial tenderness, rendered sacred to us, inasmuch as she renders us sacred, bearing our monuments and titles, continuing our names, and extending our memory, in opposition to the shortness of life. In our anger, we imprecate her on those who are now no more, as if we were ignorant that she is the only being who can never be angry with man. The water passes into showers, is concreted into hail, swells into rivers, is precipitated in torrents. The air is condensed into clouds, rages in squalls. But kind, mild, and indulgent earth, always ministering to the wants of mortals, how many things do we compel her to produce spontaneously? What odors and flowers, nutritive juices, forms and colors! With what good faith does she render back all that has been entrusted to her? It is the vital spirit which must bear the blame of producing noxious animals. For the earth is constrained to receive the seeds of them, and to support them when they are produced. The fault lies in the evil nature which generates them. The earth will no longer harbor a serpent after it has attacked anyone, and thus she even demands punishment in the name of those who are indifferent about it themselves. She pours forth a profusion of medicinal plants, and is always producing something for the use of man. But it must be acknowledged that everything which the earth has produced, as a remedy for our evils, we have converted into the poison of our lives. For do we not use iron, which we cannot do without, for this purpose? But although this case of mischief has been produced, we ought not to complain. We ought not to be ungrateful to this one part of nature. How many luxuries and how many insults does she not bear for us? She is cast into the sea, and in order that we may introduce seas into her bosom, she is washed away by the waves. She is continually tortured for her iron, her timber, stone, fire, corn, and is even much more subservient to our luxuries than to our mere support. What indeed she endures on our surface might be tolerated, but we penetrate also into her bowels, digging out the veins of gold and silver, and the ores of copper and lead. We also search for gems and certain small pebbles, driving our trenches to a great depth. We tear out her entrails in order to extract the gems with which we may load our fingers. How many hands are worn down that one little joint may be ornamented? If the infernal regions really existed, certainly these burrows of avarice and luxury would have penetrated into them. And truly we wonder that this same earth should have produced anything noxious. But, I suppose, the savage beasts protect her and keep off our sacrilegious hands. For do we not dig among serpents, and handle poisonous plants along with those veins of gold? But the goddess shows herself more propitious to us, inasmuch as all this wealth ends in crimes, slaughter, and war, and that while we drench her with our blood, we cover her with unburied bones, and being covered with these, and her anger being thus appeased, she conceals the crimes of mortals. I consider the ignorance of her nature as one of the evil effects of an ungrateful mind. Everyone agrees that it has the most perfect figure. We always speak of the ball of the earth, and we admit it to be a globe bounded by the poles. It has not indeed the form of an absolute sphere, from the number of lofty mountains and flat plains. But if the termination of the lines be bounded by a curve, this would compose a perfect sphere. And this we learn from arguments drawn from the nature of things, although not from the same considerations which we made use of with respect to the heavens. For in these the hollow convexity everywhere bends on itself, and leans upon the earth as its center; whereas the earth rises up solid and dense, like something that swells up and is protruded outwards. The heavens bend towards the center, while the earth goes from the center, the continual rolling of the heavens about it forcing its immense globe into the form of a sphere. On the question whether there be antipodes there is a great contest between the learned and the vulgar. We maintain that there are men dispersed over every part of the earth, that they stand with their feet turned towards each other, that the vault of the heavens appears alike to all of them, and that they, all of them, appear to tread equally on the middle of the earth. If anyone should ask why those situated opposite to us do not fall, we directly ask in return, whether those on the opposite side do not wonder that we do not fall. But I may make a remark that will appear plausible even to the most unlearned, that if the earth were of the figure of an unequal globe, like the seed of a pine, still it may be inhabited in every part. But of how little moment is this, when we have another miracle rising up to our notice? The earth itself is pendant and does not fall with us. It is doubtful whether this be from the force of the spirit which is contained in the universe, or whether it would fall did not nature resist, by allowing of no place where it might fall. For as the seat of fire is nowhere but in fire, nor of water except in water, nor of air except in air, so there is no situation for the earth except in itself, everything else repelling it. It is indeed wonderful that it should form a globe, when there is so much flat surface of the sea and of the plains. And this was the opinion of Hipparchus, a peculiarly learned man, who measured the heights of mountains, under the direction of the kings, and estimated Pelion, which was the highest, at 1,250 paces perpendicular, and considered this as not affecting the round figure of the globe. But this appears to me to be doubtful, as I well know that the summits of some of the Alps rise up by a long space of not less than 50,000 paces. But what the vulgar most strenuously contend against is, to be compelled to believe that the water is forced into a rounded figure. Yet there is nothing more obvious to the sight among the phenomena of nature. For we see everywhere that drops, when they hang down, assume the form of small globes, and when they are covered with dust or have the down of leaves spread over them, they are observed to be completely round. And when a cup is filled, the liquid swells up in the middle. But on account of the subtle nature of the fluid and its inherent softness, the fact is more easily ascertained by our reason than by our sight. And it is even more wonderful that if a very little fluid only be added to a cup when it is full, the superfluous quantity runs over, whereas the contrary happens if we add a solid body, even as much as would weigh 20 denarii. The reason of this is that what is dropped in raises up the fluid at the top, while what is poured on it slides off from the projecting surface. It is from the same cause that the land is not visible from the body of a ship when it may be seen from the mast, and that when a vessel is receding, if any bright object be fixed to the mast, it seems gradually to descend and finally to become invisible. And the ocean, which we admit to be without limits, if it had any other figure, could it cohere and exist without falling, there being no external margin to contain it? We must believe that the great artist, Nature, has so arranged it, that as the arid and dry earth cannot subsist by itself and without moisture, nor, on the other hand, can the water subsist unless it be supported by the earth, they are connected by a mutual union. The earth opens her harbors, while the water pervades the whole earth, within, without, and above, its veins running in all directions, like connecting links, and bursting out on even the highest ridges, where, forced up by the air and pressed out by the weight of the earth, it shoots forth as from a pipe, and is so far from being in danger of falling, that it bounds up to the highest and most lofty places. Hence the reason is obvious why the seas are not increased by the daily accession of so many rivers. The earth has, therefore, the whole of its globe girt on every side by the sea flowing round it. And this is not a point to be investigated by arguments, but what has been ascertained by experience. The globe is divided into 5 parts, termed zones, and all that portion is subject to severe cold and perpetual frost, which is under the 2 extremities, about each of the poles, the nearer of which is called the north, and the opposite the south pole. The middle of the earth, over which is the orbit of the sun, is parched and burned by the flame, and is consumed by being so near the heat. There are only 2 of the zones which are temperate, those which lie between the torrid and the frigid zones, and these are separated from each other, in consequence of the scorching heat of the heavenly bodies. It appears, therefore, that the heavens take from us 3 parts of the earth. How much the ocean steals is uncertain. The curve of the globe both reveals and conceals different objects from the inhabitants of its different parts. If the earth had been flat, everything would have been seen at the same time, from every part of it, and the nights would not have been unequal, while the equal intervals of 12 hours, which are now observed only in the middle of earth, would in that case have been the same everywhere. Hence it is that there is not any one night and day the same in all parts of the earth at the same time, the intervention of the globe producing night, and its turning round producing day. End of section 10. Recording by phone. Section 11 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 9, Italy. I am by no means unaware that I may be justly accused of ingratitude and indolence if I describe briefly and in a cursory manner the land which is at once the foster child and the parent of all lands, chosen by the providence of the gods to render even heaven itself more glorious. Footnote, by adding its deified emperors to the number of its divinities. End of footnote. To unite the scattered empires of the earth, to bestow a polish upon men's manners, to unite the discordant and uncouth dialects of so many different nations by the powerful ties of one common language, to confer the enjoyments of discourse and of civilization upon mankind, to become, in short, the mother country of all nations of the earth. But how shall I commence this undertaking? So vast is the number of celebrated places, what man living could enumerate them all, and so great the renown attached to each individual nation and subject, that I feel myself quite at a loss. The city of Rome alone, which forms a portion of it, a face well worthy of shoulders so beauteous, how large a work would it require for an appropriate description? And then too the coast of Campania, taken singly by itself, so blessed with natural beauties and opulence, that it is evident that when nature formed it she took a delight in accumulating all her blessings in a single spot. How am I to do justice to it? And then the climate, with its eternal freshness, and so replete with health and vitality, the sereneness of the weather so enchanting, the fields so fertile, the hillsides so sunny, the thickets so free from every danger, the groves so cool and shady, the forests with a vegetation so varying and so luxuriant, the breezes descending from so many a mountain, the fruitfulness of its grain, its vines, and its olives so transcendent, its flocks with fleeces so noble, its bulls with necks so sinewy, its lakes recurring in never-ending succession, its numerous rivers and springs which refresh it with their waters on every side, its seas so many in number, its havens and the bosom of its lands opening everywhere to the commerce of all the world, and eagerly stretching forth into the very midst of the waves, for the purpose of aiding as it were the endeavors of mortals. For the present, I forbear to speak of its genius, its manners, its men, and the nations whom it has conquered by eloquence and force of arms. The very Greeks themselves, a race fond in the extreme of expatiating on their own praises, have amply given judgment in its favor, when they named but a small part of it Magna Graecia. But we must be content to do on this occasion as we have done in our description of the heavens. We must only touch upon some of these points, and take notice of but a few of its stars. I only beg my readers to bear in mind that I am thus hastening on for the purpose of giving a general description of everything that is known to exist throughout the whole earth. I may premise by observing that this land very much resembles in shape an oak leaf, being much longer than it is broad. Towards the top it inclines to the left, while it terminates in the form of an Amazonian buckler, in which the spot at the central projection is the place called Cocythos, while it sends forth two horns at the end of its crescent-shaped base, Leucopetra on the right and Lacinium on the left. It extends in length 1,020 miles, if we measure from the foot of the Alps at Praetoria Augusta, through the city of Rome and Capua, to the town of Rhegium, which is situated on the shoulder of the peninsula, just at the bend of the neck, as it were. Its breadth is variable, being 410 miles between the two seas of the far north. At about the middle, and in the vicinity of the city of Rome, from the spot where the river Aternus flows into the Adriatic Sea, to the mouth of the Tiber, the distance is 136 miles, and a little less from Castrum Novum on the Adriatic Sea to Alsium on the Tuscan, but in no place does it exceed 200 miles in breadth. End of section 11. Recording by phone. Section 12 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 10. The Hyperboreans. In the far north, beyond the Riphaean Mountains, footnote, probably these mountains were a western branch of the Ural chain, end of footnote, is the region known by the name of Pterophoros, footnote, from the Greek pterophoros, wing-bearing or feather-bearing, end of footnote. Because of the perpetual fall of snow there, the flakes of which resemble feathers, a part of the world which has been condemned by the decree of nature to lie immersed in thick darkness, suited for nothing but the generation of cold, and to be the asylum of the chilling blasts of the northern winds. Behind these mountains, and beyond the region of the northern winds, there dwells, if we choose to believe it, a happy race known as the Hyperboreans. Footnote. This legendary race was said to dwell in the regions beyond Boreas, or the northern wind, which issued from the Riphaean mountains, the name of which was derived from ripa, or hurricanes issuing from a cavern, and which these heights warded off from the Hyperboreans and sent to more southern nations. Hence they never felt the northern blasts, and enjoyed a life of supreme happiness and undisturbed repose. Here, says Humboldt, are the first views of a natural science which explains the distribution of heat and the difference of climates by local causes, by the direction of the winds, the proximity of the sun, and the action of a moist or saline principle. End of footnote. A race that lives to an extreme old age, and which has been the subject of many marvelous stories. Footnote. Pindar says, in the Pythia, 1056, the muse is no stranger to their manners. The dances of girls and the sweet melody of the lyre and pipe resound on every side, and wreathing their locks with the glistening bay, they feast joyously. For this sacred race there is no doom of sickness or of disease, but they live apart from toil and battles, undisturbed by the exacting Nemesis. End of footnote. At this spot are supposed to be the hinges upon which the world revolves, and the extreme limits of the revolutions of the stars. Here we find light for 6 months together, given by the sun in one continuous day. To these people there is but one rising of the sun for the year, and that at the summer solstice. Footnote. Pomponius Mela, who asserts that the sun rises here at the vernal and sets at the autumnal equinox, is right in his position, and Pliny is incorrect. End of footnote. And but one setting at the winter solstice. This region, warmed by the rays of the sun, is of a most delightful temperature, and exempt from every noxious blast. The abodes of the natives are the woods and groves. The gods receive their worship singly and in groups, while all discord and every kind of sickness are things utterly unknown. Death comes upon them only when satiated with life. After a career of feasting, in an old age sated with every luxury, they leap from a certain rock there into the sea, and this they deem the most desirable mode of ending existence. Some writers have placed these people, not in Europe, but at the very verge of the shores of Asia. Others again have placed them midway between the two suns, at the spot where it sets to the antipodes and rises to us. A thing, however, that cannot possibly be, in consequence of the vast tract of sea which there intervenes. Those writers who place them nowhere but under a day which lasts for 6 months, state that in the morning they sow, at midday they reap, at sunset they gather in the fruits of the trees, and during the night conceal themselves in caves. Nor are we at liberty to entertain any doubts as to the existence of this race. So many authors are there who assert that they were in the habit of sending their first fruits to Delos to present them to Apollo, whom they especially worship. Virgins used to carry them, who for many years were held in high veneration, and received the rites of hospitality from the nations that lay on the route, until at last, in consequence of repeated violations of good faith, the Hyperboreans came to the determination to deposit these offerings upon the frontiers of the people who adjoined them, and they in their turn were to convey them on to their neighbors, and so from one to the other, till they should have arrived at Delos. However, this custom, even, in time, fell into disuse. End of section 12. Recording by phone. Section 13 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 2, Chapter 11. Britannia. Opposite to the west coast of Europe is the island called Britannia, so celebrated in the records of Greece and of our own country. Footnote: Britain was spoken of by some of the Greek writers as superior to all other islands in the world. Dionysius, in his Periegesis, says that no other islands whatsoever can claim equality with those of Britain. End of footnote. It is situated to the northwest, and with a large tract of intervening sea, lies opposite to Germany, Gaul, and Spain, by far the greater part of Europe. Its former name was Albion. Footnote: said to have been so called from the whiteness of its cliffs opposite the coast of Gaul. End of footnote. This island is distant from the coast of the nation of the Morini, at the spot where the passage across is the shortest, 50 miles. Footnote: the distance here given by Pliny is far too great, the shortest distance, from Dover to Calais, being 21 miles. End of footnote. Pytheas and Isidorus say that its circumference is 4,875 miles. It is barely 30 years since any extensive knowledge of it was gained by the successes of the Roman arms, and even as yet they have not penetrated beyond the vicinity of the Caledonian forest. Footnote: probably the Grampian range is here referred to. End of footnote. Agrippa believes its length to be 800 miles, and its breadth 300. He also thinks that the breadth of Hibernia is the same, but that its length is less by 200 miles. This last island is situated beyond Britannia, the passage across being the shortest from the territory of the Silures, the people of South Wales, a distance of 30 miles. Of the remaining islands, none is said to have a greater circumference than 125 miles. Among these there are the Orcades, the Orkney Islands, 40 in number, and situated within a short distance of each other, the 7 islands called Agmodae, probably the islands now known as the Shetlands, The most remote of all that we find mentioned is Thule, The opinions as to the identity of ancient Thule have been numerous in the extreme. The common, and apparently the best founded opinion, is that Thule is the island of Iceland. In which there is no night at the summer solstice, when the sun is passing through the signs of Cancer, while, on the other hand, at the winter solstice there is no day. Some writers are of opinion that this state of things lasts for 6 whole months together. End of section 13. Recording by phone. Section 14 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Book 2, Chapter 12. Mount Atlas. Through the nation of the Autololis lies the road to Mount Atlas, the most fabulous locality even in Africa. From the midst of the sands, according to the story, this mountain raises its head to the heavens. Like others of the ancient writers, Pliny falls into the error of considering Atlas not as an extensive chain of mountains, but as an isolated mountain surrounded by sands. With reference to its height, the whole range declines considerably from west to east, the highest summits in Morocco reaching to nearly 13,000 feet, in Tunis not 5,000. Rugged and craggy on the side which looks towards the shores of the ocean to which it has given its name, while on that which faces the interior of Africa it is shaded by dense groves of trees, and refreshed by flowing streams. Fruits of all kinds springing up there spontaneously to such an extent as more than to satiate every possible desire. Throughout the daytime, no inhabitant is to be seen. All is silent, like that dreadful stillness which reigns in the desert. A religious horror steals imperceptibly over the feelings of those who approach, and they feel themselves smitten with awe at the stupendous aspect of its summit, which reaches beyond the clouds, and well nigh approaches the very orb of the moon. At night, they say, it gleams with fires innumerable, lighted up. It is then the scene of the gambols of the satyr crew, while it re-echoes with the notes of the flute and the pipe, and the clash of drums and cymbals. All this is what authors of high character have stated, in addition to the labors which Hercules and Perseus there experienced. The space which intervenes before you arrive at this mountain is immense, and the country quite unknown. End of section 14. Recording by phone. Section 15 of The Boys and Girls Pliny by Pliny the Elder. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by phone. Chapter 13. The Island of Taprobana. Taprobana, It is now universally agreed among the learned that the island of Taprobana is the modern Ceylon. Under the name of the Land of the Antipodes, was long looked upon as another world. The age and the arms of Alexander the Great were the first to give satisfactory proof that it was an island. Onesicritus, the commander of his fleet, has informed us that the elephants of this island are larger and better adapted for warfare than those of India; and from Megasthenes we learned that it is divided by a river, and that their country is more productive of gold and pearls of great size than even India. Eratosthenes has also given the dimensions of this island as being 7,000 stadia in length and 5,000 in breadth. He states also that there are no cities, but villages to the number of 700. It begins at the Eastern Sea, and lies extended opposite to India, east and west. In former times, when the navigation was confined to vessels constructed of papyrus with the tackle peculiar to the Nile, this island was supposed to be 20 days' sail from the country of the Prasai. Footnote: a general term, probably, for the great peninsula of India, below the Ganges. End of footnote. But the distance has been estimated at no more than 7 days' sail. Footnote: it is probable that the passage here referred to is from Cape Comorin to Ceylon, and not from Cape Ramarancourt, the nearest part of the continent. End of footnote. Reckoned at the speed which can be attained by vessels of our construction. The sea that lies between the island and the mainland is full of shallows, not more than 6 paces in depth, but in certain channels it is of such extraordinary depth that no anchor has ever found a bottom. For this reason it is that the vessels are constructed with prows at either end, so that there may be no necessity for tacking while navigating these extremely narrow channels. The tonnage of these vessels is 3,000 amphorae. In traversing their seas, the people of Taprobana take no observation of the stars, and indeed the Great Bear is not visible to them; but they carry birds out to sea, which they let go from time to time, and so follow their course as they make for the land. They devote only 4 months in the year to the pursuits of navigation, and are particularly careful not to trust themselves on the sea during the next 100 days after our summer solstice, for in those seas it is at that time the middle of winter. So much we learn from the ancient writers. It has fallen to our lot, however, to obtain a still more accurate knowledge of these people. For during the reign of the Emperor Claudius, an embassy came from even this distant island to Rome. The circumstances under which this took place were as follows. Annius Blocamus had farmed from the treasury the revenues arising from the Red Sea. A certain freedman of his, while sailing around Arabia, was carried away by a gale from the north beyond the coast of Carmania. In the course of 15 days he had drifted to Hipparchus, a port of Taprobana, where he was most kindly and most hospitably received by the king; and having, after a study of 6 months, become well acquainted with the language, was enabled to answer all his inquiries relative to the Romans and their emperor. But of all that he heard, the king was more particularly struck with surprise at our rigid notions of justice, on ascertaining that among the coins he found on the captive, the denarii were all of equal weight, although the different figures on them plainly showed that they had been struck in the reigns of several emperors. By this circumstance especially, the king was prompted to form an alliance with the Romans, and accordingly sent to Rome an embassy, consisting of 4 persons, the chief of whom was Rachias. Footnote: possibly the word Radija or Raja, denoting the rank which he held, may have been here taken by Pliny for his name. End of footnote. From these persons we learned that in Taprobana there are 500 towns, and that there is a harbor that lies facing the south, and adjoining the city of Palæsimundus, the most famous city in the isle, the king's place of residence, and containing a population of 200,000. They also informed us that in the interior there is a lake called Megisba, 375 miles in circumference, and containing islands which are fertile, though for pasturage only. In this lake they informed us 2 rivers take their rise, one of which, called Palæsimundus, flows into the harbor near the city of that name, by 3 channels, the narrowest of which is 5 stadia in width, the largest 15, while the other, Sidara by name, takes a direction northward, towards the Indian coast. We learned also that the nearest point of the Indian coast is a promontory known as Coliacum, footnote, probably Cape Ramanan Khor, which is in reality the nearest point to the coast of Ceylon. End of footnote. Distant from the island's 4 days' sail, and that midway between them lies the island of the Sun. They stated also that those seas are of a deep green tint, besides which there are numerous trees growing at the bottom, so much so that the rudders of the vessels frequently break off portions of their foliage. Footnote. He alludes to coral reefs, no doubt. End of footnote. They were as much astonished at the constellations which are visible to us, the Great Bear and the Pleiades. Footnote. The Romans evidently misunderstood their language, for as Gosselin remarks, it is quite impossible that the Pleiades should be a constellation unknown at that time to the people of Ceylon, but on the other hand it will be equally true that the Great Bear was concealed from them. End of footnote. As though they had now beheld a new expanse of the heavens, and they declared that in their country the moon can only be seen above the horizon from the 8th to its 16th day. Footnote. This also originated in misapprehension of their language on the part of the Romans. End of footnote. They also stated that Canopus, a large bright star, gives light to them by night. But what surprised them more than anything else was that the shadow of their bodies was thrown towards our hemisphere. Footnote. In Ceylon, 7 months in the year the shadows fell to the north, and during the remaining 5 to the south. End of footnote. They also informed us that the side of their island, which lies opposite to India, is 10,000 stadia in length, and runs in a southeasterly direction. That beyond the Emodian mountains they look towards the Sere. Footnote. The Sere here spoken of must not be taken for the Ceres or supposed Chinese. End of footnote. Whose acquaintance they had also made in the pursuits of commerce. That the father of Rachias had frequently visited their country, and that the Sere always came to meet them on their arrival. These people, they said, exceeded the ordinary human height, had flaxen hair and blue eyes, and made an uncouth sort of noise by way of talking, having no language of their own for the purpose of communicating their thoughts. The rest of their information relative to the Sere was of a similar nature to that communicated by our merchants. It was to the effect that the merchandise on sale was left by them upon the opposite bank of the river on their coast, and it was then removed by the natives, if they thought proper to deal on terms of exchange. On no grounds ought luxury with greater reason to be detested by us, than if we only transport our thoughts to these scenes, and then reflect what are its demands, to what distant spots it sends in order to satisfy them, and for how mean and how unworthy an end. But yet, Taprobana, even, isolated as it is by nature from the rest of the world, is not exempt from our vices. Gold and silver are held in esteem even there. They have a marble which resembles tortoise-shell in appearance. This, as well as their pearls and precious stones, is highly valued. All our luxuries, in fact, those even of the most exquisite nature, are there carried to the very highest pitch. They asserted that their wealth was much greater than ours, but admitted that we knew better than they how to obtain real enjoyment from opulence. In this island no slavery exists. They do not prolong their sleep to daybreak, nor do they sleep during any part of the day. Their buildings are only of a moderate height from the ground. The price of corn is always the same. They have no courts of law and no litigation. Hercules is the deity whom they worship, and their king is chosen by the people, an aged man always, distinguished for his mild and clement disposition, and without children. If after he has been elected king, he happens to become the father of children, his abdication is the consequence. This is done that there may be no danger of the sovereign power becoming hereditary. 30 advisers are provided for him by the people, and it is only by the advice of the majority of them that any man is condemned to capital punishment. Even then, the person so condemned has a right of appealing to the people, in which case a jury consisting of 70 persons is appointed. Should these acquit the accused, the 30 councillors are no longer held in any estimation, but are visited with the greatest disgrace. The king wears the costume of Father Liber, or Bacchus. This means that he wears a long robe with a train, much like the dress, in fact, which was worn on the stage by tragic actors. End of footnote. While the rest of the people dress like the natives of Arabia. If the king is found guilty of any offense, he is condemned to death, but no one slays him. All turn their backs upon him, and refuse to hold any communication or even discourse with him. Their festivals are celebrated with the chase, the most valued sport being the pursuit of the tiger and the elephant. The lands are carefully tilled. The vine is not cultivated there, but of other fruits there is great abundance. They take great delight in fishing, and especially in catching turtles, beneath the shells of which whole families find an abode, of such vast size are they to be found. These people look upon 100 years as a comparatively short life. So much have we learned respecting Taprobana. End of section 15. Recording by phone. End of The Boys and Girls Pliny, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder.